Hey guys, an interesting video on Wild Rift. So we're finally back with the patch 3.3a tier list, and now the last tier list I did was for patch 3.2a. Wanted to do tier lists for patches after that, but for one reason or the other, it kind of wasn't done. But anyways, as you guys can see in the background, we're playing, of course, the normal 3 slide that we always go through for the tier list. So if you guys need to read those, of course you can pause and do so. But yeah, so the last tier list we wanted to make, we didn't quite materialize for 3.3 because 3.3a was coming out already, and for patch like 3.2 C and 3.2b, I felt the changes were too small to really make a tier list. But anyways, enough about that. We're gonna jump straight into the Baron lane, and there really is a lot of things to discuss because a lot of things have changed in the meta since my last tier list, which at this point is maybe 1 or 2 months ago, I think. I'm not too sure, but anyways, not of importance. Now we're gonna discuss the Baron lane. So the couple of major changes in the Baron lane is first up the buff to Grasp of the Undying, and of course later on the nerfs to Black Cleaver as well as Divine Sunder. Now honestly, I think the nerfs to Black Cleaver and Divine Sunder don't really matter too much for two reasons. First off, most Baron laners build these two items, so generally it's gonna affect most people across the board. Of course, some people, like for example Riven and Wukong, built both of them, whereas people like Fiora or Camille built only Divine Sunder slash Triforce. So it doesn't really affect everybody evenly, but by and large, I think the nerf to Black Cleaver is almost negligible. I think the nerf to Divine Sunder just made it such that it's a more competitive choice between that and Triforce for champions who can take both of them, like Fiora and Camille. Whereas for other champions like Wukong, who only take Divine Sunder, he's still gonna go for that. He just takes a little bit longer to hit the item Power Spike. But the change that is actually a big deal is going to be the Grasp change. Now the Grasp change, which basically makes it scale off of bonus AD and AP, has made a lot of champions strong. So as you guys can see in the S plus tier, basically all of the champions there take Grasp aside from Renekton. So Camille takes Grasp, Wukong takes Grasp, Garen takes Grasp, and so does Fiora. Of course, some of them, like actually like all of them, have other like rune choices. Like Wukong can go for Conqueror, Camille can go for, well, I guess Conqueror and Fleet as well, and Fiora can also go for something like Conqueror. Yeah, so can Garen, but Grasp more or less is normally the best option for all of them. Only Renekton goes for Conqueror within the S plus tier. So because of the Grasp change, it pretty much brought Camille and Fiora back into the meta. Now Camille and Fiora has received a large number of buffs ever since they were basically the two best Baron laners for a long time, but now it looks like they're kind of back there. Camille now is absolutely insane despite how many nerfs she's been getting. If you have the skills, you can definitely pull Camille off. Same story for Fiora. If you have the skills, Fiora is still extremely dominant, both in lane and in game. You can easily 1v1, 1v2 people with Fiora and your skills. Whereas Wukong and Garen are a little bit of a different story. Garen is basically there just because he has a really strong laning phase with the Grasp, especially at level 1. And in the early levels, if you don't make any egregious errors, you should basically never be dying. You probably pick up a Black Cleaver and go for a tanky build slash a Hullbreaker build, and you basically become unkillable. Not fully unkillable, but you become so tanky for the rest of the game. Like you are a huge problem, and you have that execute ultimate that's a big threat to any squishy carries on the enemy team. And Wukong, you have a strong laning phase with the Grasp now, and you have that huge team fight ultimate that, in a era where there's dragon stacking, heralds, and that kind of deal, that is a pretty huge deal. And yeah, and Renekton is just there because he's basically the most consistent Baron laner and one of the best blind pick Baron laners, and he has been receiving buffs the past couple of patches, although I don't think the buffs matter all that much. I just think he's a really strong Baron laner, and really strong in the early game especially, and just really a very good blind pick for Baron laner, which is sometimes really important to have, because you can't always blind pick something like a Camille. Like you can't get hard countered by something like a Jax, so you can't really have, you can't really blind pick every single Baron lane champion, which is what makes Renekton really good, because he is a really good blind pick. So now, of course, I'm not going to highlight every single champion in the S tier. I felt that Set is now weaker than the S plus tier champion, so I moved him down. I think Riven is still really strong, just not as good as the rest of the S plus champions. Darius got nerfed because of Conqueror, and also he can't really take grass, so he's not really that good anymore, but he's still, of course, in S tier. He's still alright. Jace has got that buff on his Q, of course. He's still really strong, although he, of course, does suffer from the Conqueror nerf. And Jax now is a really strong Baron laner after they adjusted him such that he only needs 5 stacks to reach max stacks on his passive. And basically he's now a really strong Baron laner and a lot weaker in the jungle. Really good late game and really good 1v1 as well. Irelia as well, just that it's a little bit hard for Irelia to get kills in the Baron lane. A lot easier in the mid lane. But Irelia is still a really strong champion if you can pilot her correctly. So the rest of the Baron lane tier list, I believe, hasn't really changed all that much. Basically, the rest of the Baron lane tier list is just about there. There are a lot of good A plus picks that are like alright, but just not good enough to hit the S plus and S tier. You guys can see the rest of the tiers for yourself. Oh, something just briefly to highlight. The Teemo changes didn't really make him a lot stronger or weaker. Overall, his power level, in my opinion, is actually about the same. So Teemo kind of stays at the spot where he was all along. Just that he's a little bit more annoying to deal with, in my opinion. So that's it for Baron lane. Now we can move on to the jungle. Okay, so huge changes in the jungle as well. As you guys can see, the S plus and S tier is very highly populated, and we have a lot of discussion points. So Lee Sin, in my opinion, is still the best. If you can execute Lee Sin properly and you're good mechanically, know the pathing, be aggressive in the early game, gank non-stop, impact the map, Lee Sin is always going to be the best jungler unless they nerf him to a point where he can no longer reach that state. But anyways, next to Lee Sin, we actually now have Shyvana. Now Shyvana, after they reworked her dragon stacking mechanic, she's now a lot more consistent in the fact that she normally can get her Q. I'm just gonna call it an evolve. She can normally get her Q evolve before the first dragon even, and if you farm really well, you can basically get up to 400 stacks within like 10 minutes of the game, and that's really possible, and I've been able to do that very consistently on Shyvana. So Shyvana is just a really safe jungler who can basically just power farm her jungle non-stop, power farm the enemy's jungle even after you get successful ganks or cross mapping the enemy while they're ganking on the opposite side of the map. Basically, you farm so quickly that you can actually stay even or ahead even if you don't actually gank, and when you do actually gank, which you do of course when your ultimate is up, it's really not that difficult to score kills or assists and stack up your passive faster. So basically it's really difficult to really shut Shyvana down. Like, the only real way to do that is to invade her and stop her from farming, but not many junglers can do that very easily. Maybe only like Lee Sin, which is why he's definitely better than Shyvana, and some of the aggressive junglers in the S tier, like maybe Camille, Jarvan, or Vi, can do that as well as Pantheon, but a little bit difficult to do that on somebody like a Wukong, for example. Speaking of which, Wukong is in my opinion, still just not still, but really good. Like, he's really tanky with the Black Cleaver and Divine Thunder build. At the same time, he does a lot of damage, so I think Wukong is still really good. The only drawback of Wukong is that his jungle clear, his first clear isn't very good, but his ganks are insane. His team fights are insane, and he's just an insane champion in general. I think Wukong is really strong at the moment, and of course he did get that W buff that allows him to go through walls, which in my opinion pushed him over the edge. Like, Wukong was always a good champion in the S tier for both Baron lane and jungle, but after he got that buff that allows him to pass through walls, that's really the buff that pushed him over the edge into the S plus tier in both roles. Now Kha'Zix's still up there, of course. Olaf's still up there as well. Echo did get a small nerf to his jungle, but he's still really good. Now Camille is good not because of the grasp buff, because you don't actually take grasp in the jungle, but she's really good because of the ultimate buff. Now, if you guys remember, Camille wasn't the best jungler at one point in time, and with the ultimate buff, now she's absolutely insane, because when she ganks, her ultimate is like basically always available. She locks someone down, and that's basically almost a guaranteed kill, which makes her ganks absolutely deadly. So she becomes really strong. And same story for Jarvan and Vi. They are both ganking junglers, and the buffs to their ultimate cooldown has really pushed them over the edge. Like with Jarvan, you have of course your really easy to execute EQ combo into the ultimate, basically making it such that if you gank someone who has flash down and no mobility, that's basically a guaranteed kill. There's basically no way that they're escaping that. Really easy to pull off tower dives with Jarvan as well, and on top of that, he is really tanky and does decent amounts of damage as well. Now Vi is kind of the same story as Jarvan, just that I think Jarvan is slightly better than Vi, but Vi has a lot easier point and click single target lockdown with her ultimate, and if you are a good Vi, you're always going to lock down the enemy like mid laner or ADC, and they're basically almost guaranteed to be dead when they get chain CC with your Q and your ult. You just need a little bit of follow-up from your team and you can basically finish them off really easily. And of course we also have Nunu. Now Nunu, I've considered dropping him down, but I realized that as long as if you're playing against a bad Nunu or not a good Nunu, you don't feel like he's very strong. But if you're playing against a good Nunu, he's going to be a really low econ jungler that's going to be basically spam ganking you non-stop, and the snowballs are really difficult to avoid. Like the first snowball, maybe you blow your flash, he like ganks you again, and basically that snowball almost always hits and you're in deep trouble because you can get chain CC'd by everything else. And yeah, so if Nunu plays well, he's still a really strong jungle, just that he needs support from his team, but he's still really good. Now Irelia, of course, passive no longer works on jungle monsters as effectively. However, she's still a really strong champion in general, so really strong in the jungle. Pantheon really strong early game, of course, and Riven just really strong jungle in general. Now Xin Zhao, nothing about him gotten weaker except of course the nerf to the items, but I simply think a lot of people are better than Xin Zhao now, but Xin Zhao still really strong in the jungle itself. So A+ tier basically just made up of a lot of good junglers that are still viable, just not as good as those above them. Now A tier, I actually got a couple of people to discuss, which is basically Nautilus and Jax. So Nautilus in the jungle, I've tried it out. Honestly, his clear isn't very bad. Like, of course, you use your W to clear the jungle. His clear is fine, and he as a tank and as an engager is actually really good. But the reason why I don't put him any higher than what he is that if you're gonna pick Nautilus in the jungle, like if you want like, you know, tankiness or good ganking potential, why not go for like Jarvan, Vi, or Nunu? All three of them are way, okay, maybe not Nunu, but Jarvan and Vi are way more easy to execute in terms of ganking. Like Nautilus has to hit his hook. Of course he can do that easily with his point and click ultimate, but if you want to use a point and click Nautilus ultimate, why not just use a point and click Vi ultimate into a Vi Q instead of a Nautilus ultimate into a Nautilus hook? Like I think Vi and Jarvan can do a lot more than what Nautilus can from in the jungle role, and Nautilus also lacks damage compared to Vi and Jarvan, and if he wants more damage, he has to build a bit of AP, which hurts his tankiness. So why not just go for Vi or Jarvan instead? Although I think Nautilus is very viable and it's okay of a jungler, but I think that they're just better choices. Now Jax in the jungle, obviously, he's now a lot worse because his passive no longer works on jungle monsters. Now what do I think of that change? Personally, I think that his first clear and his subsequent few clears are really bad. Of course, when you get a couple of items, he's alright. And if you reach the late game, that nerf is basically not gonna matter all that much. He's still gonna be a really strong champion in general, but I think that that hurts his early game a lot because he needs to farm quickly, because he kind of needs to power farm to the late game, and it really hurts his farming potential. So I think that Jax took a significant hit in the jungle itself. So the rest of the tier list basically remains the same. We have like Fizz, Amumu, Mundo, as well as Malphite and Nasus, basically not really good jungles. I actually moved Mundo down, I believe, from the B tier to the C tier because I really don't think Mundo is very good as a jungle anymore. Yeah, that's basically it. So now we can talk about the mid lane. Okay, so now in the mid lane, we have Ahri, the new queen of mid lane. Obviously, after her buff to her ultimate, she's now an absolute monster. Her mobility is basically unparalleled. Her pick potential is insane, and her escape potential is insane as well. Now, I'm planning to do an Ahri video coming up within the next week or so. I already got the gameplay for it. I'm gonna make the video soon, and I'm gonna show you guys how strong Ahri really is. Ahri is an absolute monster if you know how to play her correctly, and it's not really even that hard to play Ahri. You basically just need to hit your skill shots, being your charm and your and your Q, but it's really easy to tell a good from a bad Ahri. Like, a good Ahri hits all their skill shots or almost all their skill shots, whereas a bad Ahri really doesn't. And if you play against a good Ahri, you will basically realize that you're gonna get destroyed by them, especially because they know their damage. They go in, kill you and get back out, and then they go back in, kill someone else and get back out. That kind of deal. So a good Ahri who knows their damage can absolutely annihilate their team. Diana got the nerf to her E, still absolutely insanely strong. Same goes for Irelia. Irelia is still really strong. Same goes for Yasuo, still really good. Ziggs as well, and Karma still really strong as well despite the nerfs. But Veigar, despite that nerf to his defenses, I think is still really strong. Now, he's not far up the S plus tier. He's a little bit down to the bottom side of the S plus tier. The reason for that is Veigar is hard countered by Assassin. So the moment you have like one Zed on the enemy team, your life is gonna be hell, because all Zed has to do is focus on assassinating you, and there really is nothing you can do about it because he can shadow in and out of your cage, and your cage means nothing. However, there are a lot of games actually nowadays that you don't really see assassins. Now, assassin top is not really a thing, so really it's only assassin like mid laners, and even in the jungle there aren't a lot of assassins. Like Lee Sin, it doesn't really hard counter Veigar because he can be blocked by the cage, but in the mid lane, something like a Katarina or a Zed can easily just destroy a Veigar. However, it isn't really the most common pick at the moment. So Veigar into a non-assassin team has insane zone control with his cage, and insane scaling, of course, with his passive. And late game, Veigar just one-shots anybody. So Veigar, I think, is really strong now. Now, Kassadin, I have to put a disclaimer here, is the one champion that I'm not really sure where he stands, because as of the recording of this video, Kassadin just released yesterday, and I have played a good, like I think 10 plus games, and a lot of those games had Kassadin in it because I played PvP, because I haven't played him personally, but I have played against him. Now, what I feel is that Kassadin is basically something like a kill. So he is very easy to shut down in the early stages of the game. I will show you in the Ahri gameplay as well. I was in mid lane versus the Kassadin, and I was duo with my jungle, and basically I just got the jungler to spam gang the Kassadin, and the Kassadin basically just got shut down, and he did nothing that entire game. But at the same time, if he's not shut down, like how if a kill is not shut down, when he reaches a certain point in the game, he basically just destroys everybody. It's really easy to just pentakill the entire team, just like Rift walking in non-stop and spamming all your spells basically. So I think Kassadin does have the potential to be really good, but he also has the potential to suck. So I'm not quite sure how good he is yet, but at first glance, I don't think he will be in S plus tier just because of how weak his early game is and how he can be shut down easily if you do it correctly. But I think he is really strong in the late game. So for now, I'm putting him at the top of the S tier. Now, Echo just got a buff to his mid lane. I still think he's near the top of the S tier. Galio, really good counter pick. Katarina will always be good, and Orianna as well, really consistent, really good. And yeah, the rest of the S plus tier pretty much remains the same. Someone in A plus I want to highlight is actually Lucian. Now, I feel that Lucian now with not new, but with the buffed Kraken Slayer, I actually think that Lucian is actually pretty good. Now, his mid lane matchups are actually decent. Okay, let's just take a look at the S plus tier now. Against a Ziggs, you're not going to have too good of a time because he's always going to be far away. But against a Yasuo in the early game, if you play around the wind wall, it's an okay matchup. Irelia is an okay matchup. Ahri is an okay matchup. So is Diana. Like, all your matchups are alright. Veigar is alright as well. Like, you don't stomp any of them, but they're all like alright. I think that, like Kassadin and Echo are Katarina are really good lane matchups for Lucian. So his lane matchups are alright, and Kraken Slayer has made him a lot stronger in lane, especially. So if you play Lucian mid and you can get a kill in lane, that's going to be really good for you. However, of course, Lucian mid is probably going to mess up your team comp because you not only have double marksman, but you also are lacking a mage. So he is, a little bit limited by that. And the rest of the tier list pretty much remains the same. So now we can go on to actually discussing the ADCs. Okay, so now ADCs, as you guys can see, there's only like 3 tiers of ADCs. I think there's actually quite a number of changes. Now, I still believe that Vayne is going to be the best because she's one of the hardest carry champions you can possibly pick in the ADC role, just because she has self-peel with her E, she has invisibility on her ult. She has mobility with her Q, and she does a lot of damage. Scales very well into the late games. I think she's the one champion that, is really, I won't say consistent, but is really a champion you can hard carry on every game if you have the skills to play Vayne. So now, I actually populated the S plus tier with the addition of Xayah and Caitlyn. Now, personally, I think Kai'Sa is really, really good, but I think she's really underrated at the moment. I don't think many people consider Kai'Sa as S plus tier, but I've played so many games on Kai'Sa in this current meta, and I still think she's really strong. Like, there's no reason to move her down, in my opinion. She has so much agency, a lot of single target bursts, like with a semi-assassin style kit, mobility and shield with her ultimate, and visibility with her E. Like, you have so many tools to carry yourself. Now Xayah is the same deal. She of course is really good in the current meta because there's so many diving champions that want to go in on you, and having Xayah with her E pullback and as well as her ultimate for the invulnerability is absolutely amazing. And of course with lethal tempo as well as an attack speed crit build, Xayah does a lot of damage just by auto attacking, and Xayah has brought me a lot of success and basically got me to master by playing a lot of Xayah games. So I think Xayah is actually really, really strong now. Now I think Caitlyn sits somewhere between the S plus and the S tier. Like, I don't think she's that bad that she's in S tier, but I really don't think she's that good that she's in S plus. But I'm gonna put her at the bottom of S plus, because in lane, if you play her correctly, she can be really dominant, provided that the lane matchup you're up against is favorable, basically against something that's not like a Yuumi lane, for example. So Caitlyn really strong and then really strong in the late game. Like in the late game, a couple auto attacks will instantly destroy anybody. I have a Caitlyn video coming up real soon, and you guys will see that. But I think Caitlyn is really strong. Her main drawback is of course a lack of mobility. So now in this current meta, there are a lot of people who can dive you very easily. Like especially like Vi and Jarvan, like which I've mentioned in my jungle section of the video, are becoming really, really popular as of late. And I found myself when I'm playing Caitlyn, I keep getting dived by Vi and Jarvan, and my life is hell basically. So that's the main weakness of Caitlyn. Now Lucian, I actually feel like underrated by a lot, so I actually moved up to the top of the S tier because Lucian now is actually really, really strong, but he will always be limited by his lack of range. The only way he goes higher is if his damage output and all that trumps his lack of range. Range is always going to be an issue. Like, Lucian is a very committal champion, so in late game team fights you have to get up close and personal to actually do damage to champions, because you don't actually have the range to like sit far back and attack people like Xayah, Xayah, Caitlyn, or Jinx even. So Jinx have actually moved down from the S plus tier because, as I said, in the current meta there are way too many divers, and Jinx is way too squishy with no real self peel. Her traps take a little bit too long to activate, and she kind of just gets destroyed in one shot instantly, which basically makes you useless, and you kind of have to rely on your support to protect you, or your team to protect you, which doesn't always happen. So I don't think she's quite S plus tier anymore. Ezreal is someone else I think I've actually underrated. Now, despite Conqueror getting a nerf, I think that I'm still not sure whether you should take Conqueror or Kraken Slayer on Ezreal, but either way, I still think Ezreal is actually really strong. Despite not being a lethal tempo or Stormrazor abuser, he is still really, really good. Now, Draven is another champion I think is really good if you are really good at him. I think Draven will always really be good as long as you're good at him. Now, Corki pretty much just represents APCs, because I decided not to include APCs in my tier list anymore, because basically you only go for that if your team is lacking AP, and basically every APC is going to be like S plus or S tier if you're lacking magic damage and the enemy team is tanky. Now, Varus I think is still really good, but maybe just not S plus tier yet. Same goes for Tristana and Jhin. I actually think that they are actually really good in certain scenarios, like into certain team comps, but they're just not really catch-all kind of ADCs where you can play into any team comp. Fasting Senna I actually think is still really strong, despite the nerfs in the current patch to her attack speed. I still think she's actually really good, as long as you're duoing with someone who can farm. Ashe and MF still really weak. Same goes with Akshan in the duo lane. Like, I wouldn't recommend picking Ashe, MF, or Akshan as well as farming Senna. Like, they four are really not very good. Because considering every other ADC from A plus and above are all generally really good. Like, Varus, Tristana, and Jhin are still really good into certain comps. Technically, I guess you could say that MF is also good with and against certain comps, and same goes for Ash. But really, I think you would always almost want to pick somebody else. And now we're gonna finally discuss the supports. Okay, so finally onto the supports. Now I've actually moved Nami and Lulu down because I feel that like Yumi and Karma are far and away the two best supports, especially Yumi. Yumi is so broken at the moment in my opinion. Like in lane, where she's actually supposed to be weak, she's really good because she basically makes her ADC unkillable with the shields and the heals. Like basically you're never gonna be able to kill a Yumi lane unless Yumi detaches wrongly and you manage to CC her, and basically you can kill either one or both of them, or sometimes even none of them, like they both get out. So Yumi, in my opinion, is just way too strong, way too strong. Karma is still really good as well. Now, of course, next up we have Nami and Lulu, who are still really great as Enchanter supports, but I just don't think they're as good as the 2 in S+. Next, we got a couple of like engage supports. We have, of course, Rakan, we have Alistar, really easy to execute CC, which can knock up the entire enemy team if done correctly. Thresh, as I said, always going to be a good support. So long as you're good at him. Doesn't quite have the 5-man potential of Alistar and Rakan, at least not as easily, but still has amazing like pick potential and can save people with your lantern, etc. Now Pyke, I actually think is in the S tier, but I think that people are just not good enough on Pyke yet. Like Pyke's pick potential is insane. He's really slippery and really hard to kill despite being squishy if you play Pyke correctly. Because with his mobility on his W and his dash on his E and his stealth, of course, on his W as well, he's actually really difficult to kill, to even catch. And when you can't catch him, he regens all the health that that you damaged him for, and he basically is really difficult to kill. Like I've played against a couple of good Pykes, and I really feel that Pyke is really strong, just that people haven't gotten good enough at Pyke yet. Now Janna is a really good pick, of course, against the engagers, which are of course above her, which are like Rakan, Alistar, that kind of deal. Aside from that, a lot of other champions like Lee Sin and Akali, so sort of a situational pick, but really good against those team comps. Now A+, Nautilus. I feel that Nautilus actually is really good, a lot more consistent version of Thresh, but I think that actually Nautilus is really good actually, like to be very honest. But I just think that if you're looking for like an engager, I think that Rakan and Alistar are really good as engagers at the moment, whereas Nautilus is very single target engage heavy. Of course, you can get a 5-man knockup with your ult if the enemies group up, but that's relying on the enemies to do something stupid basically. So I think that Alistar and Rakan are really the way to go at the moment if you're looking for engage. So A+, what else do we have? We have Lux. So Lux, I think with that buff on her shield, I think she's really strong now. How big her shields are really greatly underestimated. Her shields are bigger than a Locket, so you don't even have to build Locket on Lux. You can go for something like Redemption or another enchant, because her shields are already so big, you don't really even need the Locket, or you can double down on it with the Locket itself. Now, Seraphine, I personally am a big fan of Seraphine. I think Seraphine can actually do a lot if the pilot is good. Like, you have the root on your E, you have the ultimate, and you have the heal and shield on your W, which is really greatly underrated, and you even have poke for the laning phase on your Q. So actually Seraphine can do a lot, just that I feel that people are, firstly, she's not very popular, so not a lot of people are playing her, and secondly, I think people who are playing her are playing her wrong. Like, you should be focusing more on double casting either your W or your E for either CC or heals and shields, but most people are focusing on double casting their Q for damage, which really is not the way you should be playing Seraphine support. So actually I think she's really underrated. I think she is really good. Now in the A tier, basically we have like other tank engagers or picks like Blitzcrank and Nautilus. Blitzcrank got hurt a lot by the release of Nautilus, because Nautilus is more or less a better version of Blitzcrank. Soraka got nerfed multiple times, but I still think she's good into certain matchups. But it does rely on your team, not the enemy team, not buying Grievous Wounds, which is a lot to ask for. So especially since Grievous Wounds is really cheap at the moment. Same thing for Sona. And I think Gragas is not a really good support, except in really niche situations like a farming, a fasting Senna, or like with a Yasuo ADC, that kind of thing. So aside from that, everything else more or less remains the same. So that is it for my patch 3.3 A tier list. So thank you guys so much for watching the video, and goodbye.